The boardroom air was thick with tension, the sharp tang of soda still lingering after the cruel prank. Amara sat motionless, her natural curls dripping with the sticky sweetness of Pepsi, her clothes soaked and clinging to her skin. The laughter around her was deafening. Executives, men in sleek suits and women dressed in power, chuckled and whispered as though they had witnessed the funniest moment of the year. To them, she was nothing. A black woman from an African heritage who worked quietly at the edges of their empire, someone unworthy of the seat she had been granted in the meeting. The colonel of the board, the CEO himself, smirked, pretending it had all been an accident, though the glint in his eyes betrayed his intent. "Lighten up, Amara," he said mockingly. "It's just a little Pepsi. Consider it brand loyalty." The room erupted again in cruel laughter. Amara's heart clenched, not from the cold liquid running down her face, but from the sharp sting of their arrogance. Yet she didn't shout, didn't cry. Instead, she quietly dabbed her face with a tissue, her eyes steady, her dignity intact. She had endured worse before. Poverty, prejudice, betrayal. This was not new. What was new, however, was that her tormentors had no idea who she truly was. As the meeting droned on, Amara remained quiet. She listened as ideas were thrown around the table, hollow strategies meant to impress investors. She knew their projections would fail because they had forgotten the core of what the company once stood for. But she also knew her time was coming. Every insult, every laugh, every cruel glance, they were all bricks in the wall that would soon collapse on those who mocked her. Outside the tall glass windows, the city bustled with life. Billboards of Pepsi towered above traffic, neon lights flashing slogans that had lost their meaning. Amara remembered when those words first came to life, when each phrase was born from passion, not from greed. She remembered because she had been there, because she had written them. But no one in that room knew. They thought her just another face, just another employee. Her silence was not weakness, it was patience, and soon patience would unveil the truth that would turn their laughter into shock. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that humiliating moment did not fade. It spread. In the cafeteria, whispers followed her. In the corridors, smirks shadowed her steps. Some employees looked at her with pity, others with disdain, but none with respect. Amara became the silent target of a workplace that thrived on exclusion. Her every move was watched, her every idea dismissed. When she raised her hand in meetings, her suggestions were brushed aside, only to be repeated minutes later by someone else and praised as brilliant. But what no one realized was that Amara had begun to observe them too. She studied their mistakes, their arrogance, their blind spots. She saw how disconnected they were from the very consumers they claimed to serve, how they had forgotten the communities that made Pepsi what it once was. Late at night, when the office was empty, she would remain, going through old archives, dusty records no one cared to open anymore. Each folder told a story. Each story reminded her of how this empire was truly built, not by the men in suits, but by visionaries who believed in inclusion, in connection, in giving voice to those who were ignored. Amara was one of those visionaries. She had stood beside the founders long before the empire grew so massive, long before greed corroded its foundation. But back then, she had chosen anonymity, preferring to build quietly. Now, however, silence was no longer enough. The final straw came during the company's annual gala, a glittering night held in the city's most extravagant hotel. Executives clinked glasses, photographers snapped pictures, and reporters hovered, eager for headlines. Amara was invited, but not as a guest of honor. She was invited almost mockingly, as if to remind her of her place. Some whispered she was only on the list because the diversity committee insisted. When she entered, the room quieted for a moment. Dressed in a simple but elegant gown, her natural beauty shone in defiance of every stereotype. But then the laughter returned, softer this time, more insidious. Someone murmured loudly enough for her to hear. Surprised she showed up at all. Must have borrowed the dress. Another chuckled. Careful with the champagne. Don't spill it on her. She might think it's another loyalty test. The humiliation cut deep, but Amara's resolve hardened. She moved gracefully to her seat, holding her head high. As the CEO took the stage, boasting about profits and innovation, Amara rose quietly and walked to the podium. At first, no one noticed. Then, as she stood behind the microphone, steady, the chatter slowed, but carried the weight of authority. I've listened for too long. I've watched this company drift further from what it was meant to be, and tonight, I cannot stay silent. Murmurs rippled across the crowd. Some gasped. The CEO frowned, about to intervene, but Amara raised her hand, and the room obeyed. You mock me, she continued, because you believe I don't belong here. You poured Pepsi on me as though I were nothing but a joke. But let me remind you of something you clearly forgot. This company would not exist if not for me. Gasps filled the hall. Cameras turned. Executives froze. Amara's eyes burned with quiet fire as she pulled out old photographs, contracts, documents, proof that she had been there from the beginning, proof that the vision which birthed Pepsi had once run through her veins. This company was not founded on arrogance, she said, her voice rising, but on the belief that everyone deserved a seat at the table. It was about breaking barriers, not building walls. I was there when those values mattered, and now, as I stand here drenched in your mockery, I see just how far you've fallen. The hall was silent now. No laughter, no whispers. Only stunned faces staring at the woman they thought was insignificant. For a long moment, the hall was frozen in silence. The shimmering chandeliers above cast their golden glow over faces pale with disbelief. The same executives who once sneered at her now sat motionless, unable to process the truth that had just shattered their illusions. Amara stood tall, the weight of years finally lifted from her shoulders. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked woman in the corner. She was the founder, the vision, the soul of the company they had betrayed. The CEO shifted uncomfortably, sweat forming at his temples. He tried to stammer a response, but his words fell flat against the heavy silence. Cameras from the press captured every flicker of shame on his face. Employees who had mocked her now stared down at their glasses, unable to meet her eyes. For the first time, Amara's presence filled the room with authority so undeniable, no one dared to dismiss it. She continued, her voice calm but sharp as glass. You tried to reduce me to nothing, but your cruelty only revealed how much you've lost. Your values, your vision, your humanity. I didn't need to remind you who I am. Your laughter did that for me. Somewhere in the crowd, a young intern, the same one who had once nervously offered her tissues on that humiliating day, began to clap. At first, it was hesitant, a single sound cutting through the silence. Then another joined, and another, until the hall was filled with thunderous applause. It wasn't just polite, it was reverent. They were not applauding out of obligation. They were applauding the truth. Amara did not bask in their approval. She stood steady, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. Then she leaned slightly forward, her voice dropping into a question that pierced the heart of everyone listening. How many more times will we laugh at those who don't look like us before we realize they are the very reason we stand where we do? How many more times must history repeat itself before we finally learn? The applause quieted, replaced by thoughtful silence. Some faces glistened with tears. Others looked away, ashamed. That night, no one would forget what happened. Not the humiliation they had witnessed, not the revelation that followed, and not the haunting question Amara left behind. She stepped down from the podium, her dignity unshaken, her truth spoken. The very halls that once echoed with cruel laughter now carried the sound of respect. and though the sticky stain of Pepsi had long since dried,